Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we are sharing books that make us believe in magic. As we chat about these titles, they will appear on your screen as well as the various formats that they're available in through the Monroe County system. And if you would like to get your hands on any of them, there are several ways to go about doing that. The first would be to call your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there, and they'll be more than happy to assist you. You can also do it yourself through our online catalog. That web address is on your screen now, and that will give you access to physical versions, hardcovers, paperbacks, audiobooks on CD. And some of them are also available through our digital platforms, and there are two of those through the Monroe County Library System. The first is Overdrive, and you may also hear Overdrive referred to as Libby. Libby is the name of Overdrive's app. And Overdrive offers downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also magazines. And the second platform is Hoopla. And Hoopla offers downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is there's never a waiting list. If you see a title on there that you want to download, you can do so immediately. I am Jennifer Graneski, and I am the community librarian at the Dundee branch. And our introductory question this week is, what magical creature or power do you wish actually existed? So I thought about this, and I was going to go in a direction and be really practical about something that would just be helpful in my life, you know, like magical house cleaning. But instead, I went with, if you've been listening to these, let's just make unicorns exist. Let's just have them running around, you know, and since it's my wish, I'm going to make sure they're completely autonomous beings. They can go do their own thing, take care of themselves, live their unicorn lives, you know, get elected to office, be teachers, librarians, I don't know, vote for the unicorns. So that's what I would wish for, completely autonomous, sentient unicorns in our lives. That's what I want. So there you go, unicorns. Also with us this week is Kristen Brown, who is a reference librarian at the Bedford branch. And what magical creature or power would you wish into existence, Kristen?
So I immediately thought of a house elf, but not a house elf how they are once they're liberated. I don't want a house elf that has to be, you know, enslaved by my family. I want like a Dobie that has his own rights and just like wants to help and is free to go, is an awesome friend and is there when you need them, right? Because they have those awesome magical powers. So I would go with a house elf, but I guess they would just be an elf.
An elf.
Like they wouldn't be bound to your house.
Yeah. So elves.
Elves.
All right. But Harry Potter elves, not like Legolas elves.
Helpful elves.
From Lord of the Rings.
Elves. I'll take
not
it.
warrior elves.
Full spectrum elves. I'll take
all
them.
the elves.
All the elves.
They're all welcome.
But you'd like one that will do your laundry.
If they would like to. Yeah, if they want to. Right. Like, I mean, I'd pay them, give them compensation, but
for a fair salary.
I just like them.
All right, thank you, Kristen. Also with us this week is Isabella Arnold, a processing clerk at our administrative building. And what magical creature or power do you wish actually existed?
Well, I would wish for like teleportation, like flu powder, port keys. Like I would want that. I hate driving. Like I hate thinking about how am I going to get from point A to point B. I just want to be there. The closest I ever got to teleportation would be like the subway system in New York. So I just got to sit there and read a book and it was awesome. But driving the highways, no thanks. I don't want to like leave Monroe area sometimes. I don't want to drive.
Such a fun.
So yeah, I would just want to be there. Done.
I agree.
I've literally quoted that before. Like, I wish I was in Harry Potter and I could just make this into a port key and go somewhere. That's so legitimate.
Yes. And every time, like, Jen and I were chatting about this, I always think I'm a car trip person, like, road trip. I'm not. I really don't enjoy it. Like, I get all the snacks, I got books, I got music, and about 2 hours in, I'm over it. Like, let's just be there. Like, no, I mean, I know the journey is, important, but not when you're in a car. Like, I just want to get there.
I enjoyed car trips before I turned 16 and then like had to help drive. Because like, oh yeah, give me a stack of books in the back seat. I will like, make it the entire trip. But now like that I'm required to help get us there, not for me.
It's fun.
No, I just want to get there. I want to start the fun.
Yeah, road trips are kind of the worst.
Yeah. So now that we've established that, yes, teleportation for all. All right, and finally with us this week is Jen McCarty, who is a reference librarian at our Ellis branch. And what magical creature or power do you wish existed?
I've been running through these, and yeah, house elf came to mind right away. Like quick travel of some sort came to mind right away. But I'm gonna cheat a little, and I'm gonna say I just want a magic wand. Because then I could just make a lot of those really cool things happen. So I would like a magic wand and the ability to use said magic wand. Because, I want to be Mrs. Weasley. We're all just going to reference Harry Potter. I want to be Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen. Like, oh, I'm making a nice little sauce. Here I am. Or, hey, dustbin, go do your thing. Like, I want to just be able to Mickey and the Sorcerer's Stone with the, the brooms and the mop buckets and just, let someone else do my things for me. I want a wand.
Like that scene in Fantastic Beasts where she's making the strudel and like all of the ingredients are flowing and everything looks so beautiful and you're like, wow, if only that was really the way it looked when I baked.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things, like as an adult, you read Harry Potter and you're like, wow, look at the stuff Mrs. Weasley can do. That's amazing. I wish I could do that. But then I'm like, do you need to already have prior knowledge to be able to magic the cooking? Like,
probably.
Can I only make the things I can currently make? Or do I get to magically be able to make amazing things? Like, I don't know. They don't answer that in Harry Potter.
I'm okay with it, but like just faster and like, oh gosh, I really need a vacuum. Vacuum cleaner, go do your thing. I'm going to stay in here and make a strudel.
They have those.
All right, so now that we all know what we want in our lives, we will go ahead and share the books that make us believe in magic. And why don't we have Isabella get us started?
So I don't read a lot of fiction. If I'm reading, I want like a self-help book always. So when we thought about this topic, I thought, what has, made such a huge impact on my life. And I feel like the one book that I go back to that I do the things from it every single day is The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, like Marie Kondo for life. Yeah, I love her ideas of, I am an aggressive folder. I fold all of our laundry really intensely. All of my son's little shirts are perfectly in a line and you see all the colors so you know what's there. I really appreciate her thoughts of like, thank your possessions for being a part of your life and then you can let them go. Like, thank them, like you're great, but now I don't need you. And I love her idea that, people give you gifts, but they don't want, like whenever you give a gift to someone, you don't want to like immediately think, oh, I'm burdening them with this object. So she just kind of really breaks it down that nobody wants you to be burdened with stuff. Like, thank it for being in your life and let it go. You don't need all the tchotchkes and the treasures that have ever passed through your doorway just because it was a gift from your grandmother or your great aunt Sal. Like, we don't all need the Statue of Liberty erasers that are sitting on our desks. Like, they can go off and live new lives. And I really enjoy her thoughts on just treasuring your possessions, like really note what it's there for, what value it has, what you're using it for, and treat it kindly. Bags don't want to be shoved into a box. Your clothes don't want to be shoved in so that they can't breathe. And just that idea that your possessions are like friends. They need room. They need space. So I mean, it's an older book. It probably came out in 2009-ish. No, did it really come out then? I can't remember. I just remember buying it when I was babysitting for someone and reading it then, and then being like, "You need this." It's one of the titles that I think I've bought 3 or 4 of them in my lifetime, and there's nothing on my shelf. I don't know where they're at. I've given them away to everyone. I even had a large print edition at one point in time, and I don't have it anymore because I've given it away. And I've sent it to people from like Amazon as a gift. And I just think it's a quick read, it's easy read. I mean, I know they have a series out now about it. I haven't watched it yet though. I love a good organizing book. And I've talked about quite a few organizing books on this program, but never the OG life-changing magic of tidying up. I love it. It changed my life. I love folding things. I love displaying our objects and like valuing them. So that's my first magical book that everybody should read. And then my other title is actually a fiction book. What? Isabella read a fiction book at one point in time in her life? Crazy. But so this is The Queen of the Tierling. Has anybody else read this? Read this series? There's 3 of them. It's a trilogy. Amazing. It came out.
That's one that's been on. I think it's been on my like to read list like since the first one came out, because a lot of people in the library system read it and really loved it, including your mom, Bella.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like I haven't read it, but it's been it's been on my to read list. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it.
So my mother passed it on to me. It came out in 2014. And I can remember reading it and thinking, when's the next one coming out? Like, oh my goodness. And this has been one of those books that I have followed the trilogy, and I would reread. I've read this Queen of the Tierling at least 3 times, maybe 4 times. Every time a new one would come out, I'd reread the beginning. So USA Today calls it the Hunger Game of Thrones. So it's like Hunger Games, Game of Thrones mashup, and it's set in a dystopian future. However, it's this like group of people that are now in like the feudal system, kind of. My assistant's coming over with a book to share with us as well. You hear lots of background noise. And so it's a young queen, a 19-year-old Kelsey, and she is about to ascend the throne. Oh, you can take this over there, sir. You can read that over there. That's fine. And she's been living in this cottage far away from everywhere with her 2 governess type people. And so now she's of age to be on the throne, and this cavalry comes and they got a battle to get to the castle, and it's really intense. There's a magic necklace that has lots of powers. There's a red queen over in Mortesum that she's doing a lot of crazy stuff that's very magical and very bad. And Kelsey is described in the book as being just a very plain, not pretty person, this ruddy girl that is now this queen, and the past queen was so beautiful, and so people can't believe she's the queen now, and she has magic within her, but she doesn't know it yet, and she is just, and she is kind, and she is trying to overthrow the system. So good, so magical. Yeah, it's really, I loved it, and I loved the second one. Third one was all right. I wanted it to end differently, but that was just me. And I can remember right when it came out, supposedly, like, Emma Watson loved it and, like, wanted to acquire the rights to the movie. So then I was like, well, I gotta read this. Emma Watson's Hermione. If Hermione likes it, I like it. And in this whole land, nobody, like, reads anymore, but Kelsey grew up with this huge library, and she always loved the Harry Potter 7, and that was, like, magical for me. I was like, she read Harry Potter and loved it. And yeah, so that's I highly recommend it. It's very good. It's a little, I mean, it's dark for me, but it's probably, everybody's like, oh, it's probably fine. But yeah, so good. Yeah, I can't recommend that one enough, and I don't read fiction that often. Very good.
Thank you, Isabella. That one will get added to my list, my ever-growing list. list that I'm never, ever going to read all of them. And it makes me so sad. I don't know if the rest of you, like, I have a Goodreads account and I have my books that, you know, I want to read. And I usually read in an average year somewhere between 50 to 70 books. It kind of depends on the year, the length of the books. So I try not to let my want to read list get longer than 60 books. Because I always figure, I'm like, it would take me a whole year just to read those 60 books, and I would read nothing else. So every once in a while I have to go in there and start removing books. Like, I'm never going to read this book. Like, I have a moment of sadness because I'm like, that's a book that's never going to be in my life. So that's always really hard for me. But now I'm going to be putting a book on the list. So
I think I have the audio of it too. But this one, like, you read it fast. Like, it's 488 pages. It's 488 pages. And I just remember inhaling it, like, in a weekend, done.
Wow.
Like, it was so good.
Thank you, Isabella.
Done.
And let's have Jen share her titles with us next.
Okay, so my first one, let's start with Disney After Dark by Ridley Pearson. And I like Disney. Hey, Disney. So I think that Disney World is just one of those places that, like, you feel magic. Like, even as an adult, like, you know, we live in a sadly unmagical world, but when you go to Disney World, you still feel magic. In this book series, this is the first book in the Kingdom Keeper series, and the main character's name is Finn, and he has just become one of a handful of, I gotta get my notes because I'm gonna mess up what they're called, the Disney Hosts Interactive. So basically, Disney has had a whole bunch of, like, teenagers or, like, younger kids. They've auditioned to become Disney hosts, and they're basically like not animatronic, they're like holograms that are in the theme parks. So you can go and kind of get like a tour from this, they call them DHIs, the Disney Host Interactive, that'll like walk you around and show you stuff, but they're like holograms of real people. And so Finn lives in Orlando and he beats out a whole bunch of people to become a DHI, which is awesome and it's great. And he's like kind of famous, but like it's neat now. I get to go to Disney World and yay. But things start to go weird when Finn falls asleep one night and wakes up in Disney World. And he discovers that himself and the other DHIs are able to occupy like their holographic bodies at night in the theme park. So they will go to sleep and they will wake up in the theme park as their holograms. And they also discovered that the theme park comes alive at night. All the attractions basically come alive. And something magical is happening where there's kind of a darkness seeping over the theme park and possibly the world. There's a group called the Overtakers, which are led by the Disney villains, and the worst one is Maleficent, who wants to take over the park and then the world. And so Finn and his fellow DHIs have to figure out how to stop this. And I love this book because I love Disney World. And it takes you, if you're familiar with Disney World at all, it's amazing because they actually, you know, go into some of the attractions where things are coming alive. They get chased by the children of It's a Small World, which is kind of horrifying, but also hilarious if you're familiar with it. There's stuff with the pirates, and they kind of have like, they make like little alliances with different, characters from the parks. And I just love that idea of like the Disney parks coming alive after night. So the first book is Disney After Dark, and they're super fun. They're kids, they're J's, so they're like younger readers. But they're just really, really fun books. And I mean, what's more magical than Disney World? And so my second book, switching gears, is Aragon by Christopher Paolini. And I chose this one because I think I read a lot of fantasy, and really good like high fantasy is not super accessible to a lot of people. A lot of people think like, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones and these super long book series, and they're long and they've got appendixes and maps, and like you've got to be a special person to like that stuff. Aragon was actually, when it was first written, it was written by a 15-year-old, which I just think is amazing. I mean, he kind of worked on it for a couple of years, and I think he was like 18 maybe when the book officially came out. But I love it because he was younger, even though it's still fantasy, it's still a little bit complicated. Like, it feels a little more accessible to me. And so what Aragon is the main character. I can't think of his name. Okay, I'm looking at my notes, not remember. It doesn't matter. I don't remember what his name is. Oh, his name is Aragon. Duh, it's the name of the book. So Aragon finds a rock, and he thinks this rock is really pretty, and that's fantastic. Well, it turns out it's not a rock at all. It's an egg. And all of a sudden, Aragon has a baby dragon in his house. And he's heard these stories of these mythical dragon riders that used to be a part of their world. And he realizes that he's hatched this dragon, and now he forms a bond with the dragon that he names Saphira. And so he realizes that he's kind of like a new dragon rider, which of course there haven't been dragon riders in forever. So, this is probably not great for him because people don't want this. So he goes on a quest, as all good fantasies do, to try to figure out, kind of where Saphira came from, also where the other dragon riders went. And then of course there's darkness, and there's elves, and there's magic, and there's this really cool storyteller that's kind of teaching him stuff. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's just wonderful. Like, you find out a lot about the dragon riders and the past of this land. And this is technically a YA, but it's got all the really good things of a good fantasy, plus dragons. And it's just, it's got a little bit of magic. It's got the different sort of fantasy creatures, elves, and monstrous creatures, and magic, and storytellers, and it's just got all the fun, and it's a quest, and it's just a really, really great series. I think that is a really nice place to start with fantasy, especially if you have like, a younger teen or like a mid-teen who kind of is interested in fantasy but doesn't want to dive into 12 books of something really heavy. Aragon is just really fun, and I thoroughly enjoyed them, and I think that any other fantasy reader would like them too.
My son, who's 12, just finished the last one in the quartet. And he gave them 2 thumbs up, and he read them very quickly. So I can speak to that. If you have somebody that's interested in fantasy,
they're fairly thick, but they're fairly quick reads too.
And did you want to talk about your third book, Jen?
I forgot I had a bonus third book.
Bonus book.
I forgot about my bonus book. So when we first came up with this, books that make us believe in magic, the first book that I immediately thought of is The Magicians by Lev Grossman. And I wanted to talk about it super briefly because it's one that we have mentioned on our program before. But why I wanted to do this book is because I think most of us, if you've watched us at all, you've heard us mention it, and we've spent a lot of time referencing it already in this episode. We love Harry Potter. Like, let's be honest. Harry Potter, it's impacted all of us in some way. And I feel like The Magicians is kind of a grown-up Harry Potter. It follows our main character who finds out that he's been accepted into a magic school, but it's for adults. It's kind of like magic. In the books, it's like high school. Trying to remember because the books and the TV show are not exactly the same, and they've melded. I think
he's late in high school.
Yeah, it's kind of like a prep school. Yeah. But it's like a Harry Potter in that way that he goes to this school and he finds friends, and he finds something that his life has totally been missing. He's always been kind of an outsider. He's a little too serious. He's a little depressed, and he suddenly finds his place in the world. These are definitely adult books. They're not Harry Potter. They're definitely adult books, but they're wonderful. And the world that it pulls you into, there's, sort of the magic school world. It's Break Bills is the name of the school. But then there's also this fantasy world kind of within the world that's Harry Potter-esque. And it's just, I just love this. There's 3 books in this trilogy. There's also a TV show that I also think is great, but The Magicians definitely comes to mind. I think it definitely appeals to anybody who loves Harry Potter and kind of wonders what if there was a magic school? because this is sort of, I mean, it's definitely not realistic, but it's that sort of, if we had this magic in our real world, what would it look like? With kind of the grittiness and the adultiness of just our like actual lives. So The Magicians by Lev Grossman.
I also second that. Jen already knows that. I also really enjoyed this trilogy, but definitely not for kids, and definitely much darker than Harry Potter.
There's some real dark stuff that goes on, but
it is really good, and it's fabulous on audio. Thumbs up. Thanks, Jen. And let's have Kristen share her books that make her believe in magic next.
So when I was planning books to do for this, I originally was thinking of all these titles that I've already talked about. Apparently I read a lot of magic books. So I was like, okay, there goes all my fiction out the window. But I also read a lot of nonfiction about magic, just because I'm super interested in like mythology and folklore. So the two books that I chose take more of like a historical approach to it. So the first one is The Art of the Occult by S. Elizabeth. And this book is amazing. I'm probably just going to buy a copy of this book for myself. You can literally just go through and look at the artwork. You don't even have to spend a lot of time reading any of it. There are some really great bodies of written work that's in there that explains a little bit more about the different sections and what happened historically with those. But it's just super awesome. And for me, artwork is directly tied to culture and history. Like if you want to know what people were going through and what they were dealing with and what they believed, you look at the artwork of that time and you look at the artwork of that culture. And so by looking through this book, it makes me feel like magic is real, because you have artwork from the 15th century that has to deal with mysticism and occult and all of these crazy things that some people still, believe and adhere to. And then some of us just think like, oh, that's something that they put in fiction books. And so for me, it's always really interesting to do research into this. So the book is broken up into 3 sections. You have the cosmos, which is like your sacred geometry, astrology and zodiac, which is, people still, whatever your sun sign is, right? So I'm a Leo, bam. Elements, alchemy, and then there's like the higher beings where it talks about mythology, immortals. And then you have the practitioners, which is like your spiritualism, witchcraft, divination, and things like that. So a couple of the pictures that are from this book. The first one is the Fox sisters, and this story is so crazy to me. So they were actually very predominant in the spiritualism boom that happened in the early 17th, 18th century. And spiritualism was the belief that when you passed on, your spirit was kind of stuck in this realm. It was kind of like in between worlds, and it was, they believed that the spirits had a genuine interest in what people were doing in their everyday lives. So you see a lot of TV shows and photographs of like seances during the Victorian time. That would be spiritualism. And so the Fox sisters actually were pretty famous because they were trying to play a trick on their mother. And so they started rapping on the doors and the walls and told their mother that they could hear the spirits and that they were communicating with spirits through rapping on the walls. And somehow this story reached a whole bunch of other people who believed in spiritualism, and they became famous for it. And they would go to these different places and do all these seances. And later, as time went by, they actually admitted, like, we just made it up. We were just trying to trick somebody. But at that point, spiritualism had taken off so long and so far that people didn't really believe them. And so it was this big controversy based around the sisters. And unfortunately, all of them kind of had this really terrible ending to their lives because it just kind of took over everything with them. But so that was a crazy story. I'm
just going to jump in here just to give a shout out to a podcast, because when you said that was the Fox sisters, I listened to a podcast called Unobscured, and the first season is about the Salem witch trials, and season number 2 is about the spiritualism movement in the United States. And he goes through everything that the Fox sisters did and the performances that they gave, and it's fascinating.
It is.
So if you look at this book and you want to know a little bit more about them, Unobscured, season 2. Yep. So just shout out for a podcast.
Yes, there's so many good podcasts about these.
There's so much out there.
So yeah, and then there was like this huge thing with spiritualism with none of the photographs were in this book, but there was a specific photographer who he actually did a picture of Mary Todd Lincoln and like superimposed Abraham Lincoln behind her. Like that was a big thing during the time because it was supposed to be Abraham Lincoln's spirit coming back to comfort her. So fascinating to me. And so the second photo is just a photo from 15th century. It's called Reading the Tarot. It's by Israel von Mechanem. And so I mean, there's so many great pictures and artworks in this book, but I chose this one just because, I mean, it's 15th century and here you have somebody reading tarot. Like so that must have been happening in wherever this artist was from during everyday life for them to be able to, you know, sketch that out. So I thought that was fascinating. And the third photo is one of my favorite photos of all time. It's by graphic design artist Alphonse, and I think it's pronounced Mucha. I don't know, it's M-U-C-H-A. It's from 1896, and this was just a picture that he created for a calendar. But it's the Art Nouveau style, so I'm sure everybody's pretty familiar with that, but it's just beautiful, beautiful calendar that has all the zodiac signs and all the animals that correspond with the zodiac. So if you are into art and you're into history and you're into any kind of like occult, spiritual, whatever, you're just curious, such a great book, super awesome. And then my next book, it's kind of similar to a book I've already talked about, which is Waking the Witch, but it goes over a historical timeline, kind of like geographically, of where substantial witch hunts or witchy history has happened. And so the author is Kristen Soleil, and she talks about trips that she's taken to Italy, France, Germany, Ireland, the UK, and the United States. And she writes it from first person, so she talks about her different experiences in each of those areas because they all had something to do with some kind of witch hunt. So a majority of the book is based on like 15th, 17th century, the early witch hunts, the early European witch hunts, and then she also talks about the Salem witch trials. But it's just crazy because she talks a lot about obviously how women were targeted and why they were targeted, how this all came to be, but she talks a lot about also the beginning and how the lines between, you know, like traditional religion and paganism, you know, kind of blurred for a while, and for a while they were kind of mixed, and then throughout history they became very separate. And there's also this big discussion about how today a lot of these places are places for tourism and kind of like these kitschy things, right? You think of Salem, that was a really horrendous thing that happened in American history, and now you can go to Salem and they have like witches on their police cars. They have, you know, like tourist shops all over the place. And this is kind of only a thing that happens with witchcraft. And so her just going to these different places not only made me want to visit them just to see, you know, like the memorials they have and like these little villages, and to witness like their traditions and their superstitions that they still carry. So like that to me made it feel real, that these are landmarks that are real, that you can go to because people really believed that these things existed.
Thank you, Kristen. And my titles are more of the stereotypical fantasy magic. The first one is The School for Good and Evil by Soman Shainani. And I picked this up. I don't even know how old this book is now, but it's been quite a while. And this was released, I don't know, there was a whole bonanza of magical school novels that came out for tweens post Harry Potter. And, you know, and they were all fun and lovely, but most of them were pretty forgettable. You read them, you moved on, and you're like, okay, that was nice, but it wasn't different enough from Harry Potter to be memorable. It didn't have great characters. It didn't have a great plot line. This was one of the first ones that I was like, I would read more of this, and I flew through it. So the plot for The School of Good and Evil In the town of Gavaldon, there are two girls. There's the beautiful, blonde, lovely Sophie, who is always making muffins to give to neighbors and who always wants to help her father. There is Sophie. And then there is Agatha, who lives in the graveyard with her mother, who, lo and behold, is considered to be a witch. She has a hairless cat for a pet. She doesn't seem to like anybody. So these two young girls grow up in the town of Gavaldon, and every 4 years in Gavaldon, two children are taken to go to the school for good and evil. And if you get chosen, there is the chance that if you graduate, you may end up being in your very own fairy tale. Because fairy tales are written based on the lives of those who go to the school for good and evil. The School for Good and Evil is in the Endless Forest. Anything that's not in the Endless Forest isn't part of that fairy tale world. Gavaldon isn't part of the fairy tale world, but every 4 years, two, and they call them readers because they read the fairy tales, they don't live them, two readers are chosen. And so everybody sort of assumes, guess who's going? Sophie and Agatha. Who's going to end up in which school? Well, Sophie's going to be in the school for good. Agatha is going to be in the school for evil. The two girls themselves believe this. And they are chosen, and they go to the school for good and evil. And lo and behold, Sophie is thrown into the school for evil. And Agatha is thrown into the school for good. So now the lovely, beautiful Sophie has to go to classes for uglification and evil curses and scarification, and my personal favorite, henchman training. And Agatha, who is perfectly happy in her black dresses and clumpy shoes and being grumpy with everyone, has to go to classes for princess etiquette and beautification and animal communication. And of course, neither girl is happy about this. This isn't what they wanted. And they try and switch and they can't switch. And then while they're in the school, it turns out that there is a prophecy about them, that if they want to have a story, a fairy tale of their own written about them, one of them is going to have to sacrifice their life for the other. So it's a really interesting premise. It's got a lot of twists and turns. You can read the first one and never go on to read the rest of the books in the series. So if you're like, oh, I don't want to commit to 7 books, the first one really, I think, was probably published in the hopes that it would do well, but nobody knew if it would. And so they didn't know that there would be sequels. So the first one you can read without reading the rest of them. It is a quick read. It really does a lot with turning, with complicating dichotomies, particularly I think for that tween age group where everything does feel like it is good and evil. It's black and white. It's boy and girl. It's truth or fiction. You know, like, and Chinani does a lot in all of the books trying to play with that and say that things aren't always so clear cut. Our world is pretty messy. And so let's be real about that. And it's fun because, you know, clearly Agatha going to princess class isn't going to go well. Sophie manages to make evil kind of glamorous, you know, because that's who she is. So it's got a lot of fun. It turns a lot of things on their heads. And it's got good twists in it. It's got stuff where there seems to be a conundrum where you're like, well, if one of them has to sacrifice themselves for the other, somebody's not going to come out of this book alive. So either this is going to have a really terrible ending, or you got to find a way out of this that is still fair to the reader. So 2 thumbs up. I really enjoyed it. The first one's still my favorite, but they're all enjoyable as they go on. They just get a little more complicated as they go on. But really good series. If you got tweens and they liked Harry Potter, this one is worth handing to them. Even if it's a boy, there are boy characters in there because my son loves all of these books. We have purchased the whole series and he's read them all several times. So 2 thumbs up for The School for Good and Evil. The other book I chose, I think, was published last year. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And V.E. Schwab has written quite a few books. This is the first that I have read. But now that I've read this one, I'm curious to go back and try some more by her. So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. It is 1714 in France. And Addie has grown up in sort of this little town where she has a grandmother that keeps telling her to be careful about the gods that she prays to. You need to be careful. There are gods that are going to trick you. There are gods that are dangerous. There are spells that can't be done. She tells her that there are spells for the witches, but be careful because witches are too often burned. And so Addie grows up in this world that sort of has magic in it, and she believes in that. And then as she gets older, she discovers that most of that magic is going to go away for her, and her freedom's going to go away because she's going to get married. And her parents have chosen who she's going to marry. And while she doesn't hate the guy, she's not super excited about it. The night that she is supposed to get married, she takes off, runs into the forest, and prays to those old dangerous gods and asks for her freedom. But you got to be careful with those old gods, because asking for your freedom might not give you what you think you really want. And so she makes this Faustian deal. She gets her freedom, but the freedom that she gets means that nobody will ever remember her. If she leaves your sight, you completely forget that she exists. She's also unable to leave a mark on anybody's life, so she can't write anything down. She can't leave a note for somebody. She can't leave anything with them that would make a mark on their life. But she's free. She doesn't have to get married now. She can go and do what she wants. All of the rules that used to apply to her are sort of gone. But she has to figure out how to survive when nobody remembers who she is. How do you find, I mean, it's the 1700s. How do you find someplace to live consistently when your land person isn't going to remember who you are? How do you get a job as even a maid if you're going to leave the room and come back and they have no idea who you are? So she has her freedom, but she's got to figure out how to survive. And the other thing is that her name isn't Addie. That's the other thing. Nobody can know her real name. She can't tell anybody her real name because, again, then they would remember who she is. So she has to, that's why she refers to herself as Addie. She never refers to herself as the same name. And about every few years, this god, this darkness, whatever you want to refer to it as, comes and visits her and sees how she's doing, because she's allowed to be let out of their bargain at any time as long as she's willing to give her soul to him. So she can continue to try and make a life with nobody remembering her, with not making any connections that will last. She can make momentary ones as long as she doesn't leave the room. Or she can give her soul to this god. What a fascinating conundrum. It is a bit of a slow burn book. You have to be willing to follow along with Addie as she figures out how to make a life for herself. And so the book covers from 1714 up until somewhere in the 2000s. It goes until contemporary times. And clearly there are, hundreds of years that sort of get skipped over. But it is a slow burn book as you follow Addie through this life that she thought she wanted, and she's got to figure out how to make it into the life she really does want. So it's really a good conundrum. Like, how does a writer solve this? It was enjoyable. I think a lot depends on whether or not you grow to care about Addie. And as long as you do, I think the book is definitely worth going on the trip for. So that one, I think the magic in that one was just thinking about how would you survive without being able to make a long-term connection with anyone. It was just how important that is to us as humans. And that's a kind of magic in itself when you have that connection with someone. So those are my two books that make me believe in magic. We will be back in a couple of weeks. And when we come back, it's going to be May. And May is Get Caught Reading Month. And so we are just going to be sharing whatever it is we happen to be reading that week when we're recording. It's what you would catch us reading that week. So we'll be back in a few weeks. Thank you to all of you who shared your books. Thank you to everybody who listened. and we hope you have a great week. Bye.